so last week we finished our patterns, okay? This week we're going to do we're going to work on starting to make what we call mock-ups. Now, a mock-up is exactly like it sounds. I'm going to take my pattern and I'm going to make a sample of it out of really cheap, crappy fabric so that I can see where adjustments are going to need to be made to the doublet itself, okay? I've never managed to draft a pattern the first time and get everything exactly right. Usually there's small little adjustments that need to be made. This is true if you're draping patterns. You'll do this several times. So the drafting, I usually only have to do it once. I make one mock-up and that's it. Now first I folded up my pattern from last time, so in order to use it, I'm going to want to iron it, okay? Now, if you use the right paper, you can just press it. Just set your iron on a nice hot setting, no steam, and just press it out. Try to make it as flat as possible. That way, when we go to use it, it will sit flat on our fabric and, won't roll up on us or anything like that. So when I put my pattern in my envelope, I try to use as few folds as possible, and it makes it a lot easier. But I mean, depending on the size of your envelope and everything else like that. Some people make patterns out of a fabric we call muslin. Muslin is a very cheap loose woven fabric. The only reason I don't like making patterns out of fabric is fabric stretches and it will mess your pattern up after a while. So I make them out of paper. Yeah, eventually the paper wears out and then I just make another one. Okay, I'm going to change over time anyways, yeah?
Do you reuse this for another?
Oh yeah, I'll use this pattern over and over and over again. Once I have the pattern and I've gotten it so that it fits, I can use it over and over and over again. And the nice part is I only have to make the mock-up once, okay? Make the mock-up and then I adjust the paper pattern. I add or subtract fabric or, pieces, I can add paper, using tape, to the pattern. I can make adjustments here and there to make the pattern match, what I want it to do, and then boom, I never have to make another mock-up again. I can just pull the pattern out of the envelope. As long as I haven't gained or lost too much weight, it should fit me. Now, if you have kids and you're making this for a kid, of course you're going to make the pattern once, maybe twice, and the kid's going to grow out of it. But, for most of us, once we've reached adulthood, we don't change too much. And so, we may vary, 10 to 15 pounds up and down. But really, honestly, that's not going to make too much of a difference in your pattern if you've made it right. So now we need to prep our fabric. Now, I like to use cheap flat sheets that I get at Walmart or Dirt Cheap or something like that for my mock-ups. Why? Because, well, they're cheap. I don't go for the high cotton. And they're usually fairly not stretchy. Okay, you want a fabric for your mock-up that's not very stretchy, okay? If you can find like a 50-cent a yard fabric, that works great too. So, yeah. What we want to do first is prep our fabric, okay? Come on over to the ironing board, you'll see how I prep my fabric. Okay, I need to put a fold into my fabric, okay, because some pieces get cut on a fold. When we do this with our fashion fabric, we'll have to take the pattern of our fashion fabric into consideration on where we put our fold into the fabric. This will help us. You guys have seen it on doublets and stuff where I've got that perfect lined up piece in the back. In fact, I think this doublet has it. Yeah. And if you look at the back of this, yes, there's trim on it, but you can see it matches up pretty nice. Okay, and the front pieces look fairly consistent on the front. Okay, that's because I pressed this in such a way that I knew all my pieces were going to match up. Okay, if you try to lay out separate pattern pieces and make them match up perfectly, it'll never happen. Okay, you'll spend hours and you'll be frustrated because you can't make things match up the way you want. If you press your fabric right, boom, it'll be fine. Okay, now depending on your fabric will depend on how hot you set your iron. Pretty much I just set mine hottest setting all the time. If my fabric can't survive the hottest setting on my iron, it's not going to survive fighting. It's not going to survive several washings that it's going to need for fighting. If it's that sensitive of a fabric, well, then I'm not going to use it for fighting fabric, okay? Now, I have used silks before for doublets. I don't iron those on the hottest setting because that would be silly. But for the most part, I'll use the hottest setting. I want to use a steam setting or a water bottle, a spritz bottle, And what I want to do is I want to iron my fold first and then press out from the fold to get rid of the excess fabric, okay? And I'm only going to do however wide my ironing board. Yes, I realize I could take this fabric and turn it lengthwise. And, I'd be able to iron more of the fold, but then I wouldn't be able to press the excess fabric out of the fold. So again, I work towards the edge, okay? And if I've got a good iron, this should be fairly simple, okay? If you've got a bad iron, get a new iron. It's that simple. They're not that expensive. You can find them on eBay. Yeah, and again, you can see I'm correcting this fold every time I move my fabric on the board. I correct this fold. I make sure my edges line up. Make sure my fold is consistent. Okay, I want my fold to be consistent. Now this fabric's already been washed. Okay, because it's just sitting in my stash. When we get to cutting and sewing the doublet, the first thing you're going to need to do is wash your fabric. Now, the reason I wash my fabric is because, especially if I'm making a fighting doublet, I want to be able to wash it. I want to be able to throw it in the machine and wash it. So you're going to want to test your fabric, no matter what it is. Take a section of it, 6-inch by 6-inch section, okay? Serge the edge or seam the edge so it doesn't fray all over the place, and wash it. Wash it on the hottest cycle you have, okay? Whatever your hottest, harshest cycle on your machine is, wash it on that. Then dry it on the hottest cycle you have. You call that boil and bake. Okay? If your fabric can survive boil and baking, then you'll be able to use it in a doublet and you'll be able to wash it, and you can wash it on the delicate cycle and there's nothing going to happen to it. And you'll be able to get all nice sweat and grime out of it. Also, boiling and baking the fabric will show you whether or not it will shrink. Okay? Most fabrics, I say most, you boil and bake it once, and you'll get all the shrinking out of it, okay? Some fabrics, especially chenilles or other loose weave fabrics like chenilles, you'll boil and bake it, and then you'll wash it on the cold, delicate cycle, and it will still shrink. And the more often you wash it, the more it will shrink. So you want to test your fabric. You want to make sure it's going to survive a wash. I have some outfits that I don't wash, okay? I have some outfits that are dry clean only and stuff like that. Those are very special fabrics. Those are usually the fabrics I paid $40 a yard for or more, okay? And those fabrics don't get fought in, period. I don't fight in those outfits, okay? No, those outfits are strictly for show, okay, and for me looking pretty, okay? I have several of those, okay? You guys saw the wool one. You saw the silk one I wore the other day. you know, I don't wear that outfit for fighting because it's, you know, $40 a yard silk, okay? It's how it works. But, you know, if it's a fighting outfit, I need to be able to wash it. And so, you may also see me, I'm smoothing out the wrinkles underneath as I go along, okay? Well, I'm at the end, cool. Now this is, I think, a twin size sheet. Depending on who you are as a person, you may need more fabric. Usually a twin size works for most people. I suggest a queen size if you can find it. Or like I said, just 50-cent a yard fabric is great, okay? All right, I finished my ironing now. Oh, okay, on the floor, I gotta be able to pick it up, okay? And so, but I don't want to just grab it up and fold it in half. I want to fold it in such a way that I can keep most of the flatness, and it will allow me to unfold the fabric in like an accordion fashion for when I need more fabric. So you can see I've made a nice little, as if I pull on this, whoop, it just kind of unfolds. Okay? And that's the way I want it. And there's, I've prepped my fabric, it's all ready to go for when I want to draw my pattern on. Okay? So, what we're going to do is we're going to stop the camera, and you're all going to prep your fabric. Go! Alright, so what we're going to do now is we're going to lay our fabric out, our pattern out on our fabric. Okay? This is pretty much what we're going to do when we get to the point where we're actually making the doublet, but we're going to do it, you know, now for the mock-up as practice. Okay? This is where we add our seam allowances. Okay? Because there are no seam allowances on the pattern you made. When you pack it, you may have noticed it said there are no seam allowances. Pay attention to this, okay? And this is where our flexible ruler is really going to come in handy. I think I still have a couple extras if we end up needing them, okay? What size seam allowance you use is completely up to you. I use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Other people use a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I've seen people use 1/4 inch seam allowance. Completely up to you on how you want to construct. I like a 1/2 inch. It still gives me enough seam allowance to play with, but it's not too much in my opinion. Okay, it's also not too little. I like a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Like I said, others prefer like a 5/8. I think Steph prefers a 5/8. So the first piece we're going to do is the back piece. Okay? So we start with the back piece of our pattern. Remember, it says fold. This is the folded edge of my fabric. So I put that right along the edge of the fold. Boom, just like that. Okay? Now, depending on how wide my fabric is will depend on how I place my pieces and everything else like that. But since I have a fold right here, that's the fold I use. When you fold your fabric, it should be lengthwise. Okay, so we'll take the narrowest part, fold it in half so it's along the length of your fabric so that the fold is as long as possible. Okay, there are other times when you want it. So for a mock-up, we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance on every seam. That means wherever two pieces of fabric are going to connect, we're going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. When we get to our doublet, that's going to change. Our clear ruler has divinations along the width. Okay? The nice part about this particular one is this piece up here where it's nice and clear, that's exactly a 1/2 inch. Okay? So I take that bold line and I place it along the edge of my pattern. Okay? And then I can take my fabric, handy dandy fabric marker, you can see, oh look, it's made a line. See how that works? Now, I don't want my fabric moving, or my pattern piece moving as I mark. So you can use weights. Scissors make a nice weight. I have used Yankee candles, the candles in the little glass pots, those work really well. You can use just straight little tiny weights, whatever you want to use, but you want something to, keep your pattern piece in place while you draw your seam allowances, do not pin your pattern piece to your fabric. If you use pins, you wrinkle the fabric and you wrinkle your pattern piece, which will mess things up. Okay? So what I'm going to do now, on the areas where there's curves, like this one right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little line, little line, little line, little line, and slowly get around that curve, and you can see I've got, and then again, I'm just going to do this all the way around my fabric. Now, if I'm using one of these fabric markers, it's really nice, because let's say I screw up. Well, if I just kind of brush the fabric, it erases quite nicely. Okay. Yes, I know I'm using yellow chalk on a brown fabric. I can see it, but if you want, these do come in blue chalks. I should have probably used the blue fabric, but oh well. Hindsight's 20/20. But again, this armhole is probably going to be the hardest part because it's the one with the most curve. Now again, for the mock-up, we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. When we get to the actual doublet construction, we're going to use a different construction method on parts of the doublet. And so parts of it will actually only have a 1/4 inch seam allowance, because we're going to use bias tape construction method on the actual doublet. But when we get to that part, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okay? Alright, so I've gone all the way around my piece. I can then pick it up and set it aside. I don't need it anymore. Now, if I want to, I can take my chalk and I can actually make a little B right here, and that tells me it's my back piece. Okay? Me personally, I know what it's shaped like, so I don't really worry about it. Like I said, how I place the rest of my pieces is completely up to me. But you want to try and conserve some fabric. So, with the collar piece, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a fold. But if you don't do the collar piece on a fold like this, you're going to need to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on that side. I'm going to do mine on a fold. Right about there. Where's my epaulette piece?
It's on the floor.
It's on the floor over here. Oh, of course it is. Yeah. It's kind of like a puzzle, Yeah, you can't put them right next to each other because you got to remember you're going to need a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now, about the only place where you're not going to use that 1/2 inch seam allowance is places where you don't need a seam, right? Well, along the top of this collar, is that going to be a seam? No, that's an edge. Same thing with the front of the collar. Is that a seam? No, that's an edge. The bottom of the skirting, that's an edge. The edge of the front, where the front meets right off the button stand there, that's an edge. Anywhere where it's an edge, okay, no seam allowance, okay, because we're not going to need it for the mock-up. In fact, we don't want a seam allowance so we know that it matches up correctly. If we put a seam allowance there by accident, we'll screw up, okay? Like I said, if I add a seam allowance to the bottom of this skirting, my skirting is going to be an extra 1/2 inch longer because it's not going to get sewn into anything. A seam allowance is simply the fabric that's going to be taken in when you sew pieces together, okay? And you'll see that as we sew. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to go through and you're going to lay your pattern out. Now, finally, the sleeve piece. You only need one sleeve because this is a mock-up. Okay? We're only going to need one sleeve so we can make sure the sleeve length is correct. However, if you want to cut 2 sleeves out, go right ahead. Completely up to you. Now, since I'm choosing to conserve fabric, I'm not going to cut this sleeve on a fold because it fits very nicely right here. Yeah. Normally, what I would do is I would just lay this on a fold, or maybe I would fold it, the other way, and I could actually cut out 2 sleeves at once, is if I took my fabric right here, okay, and I folded it up this way like this, oh, now I have 4 layers of fabric there, don't I? And both of these sections are a fold. If I took my sleeve and I put it right there, I could cut out 2 sleeves at the same time, if my scissors are sharp enough. And as long as your fabric's not too thick, you can do little tricks like this, okay? We'll probably do that when we come to our regular fabric, okay? For the mock-up, like I said, you only need 1 sleeve, okay? So you can choose so go ahead, and what you're going to do is you're going to lay your fabric out and draw in your seam allowances, okay? Everybody understand?
Yeah.
All right, I'll help you out as soon as I get done doing mine.
Thank you for
All right, first I want to talk to you about scissors and what makes a good pair of scissors for cutting fabric out and what makes a bad pair of scissors for cutting fabric out. This is a good pair of scissors. As you can see, when it sits on the table, it sits fairly flat. This is why the people like the gingham scissors so much, because the gingham scissors are nice and long, and they've got a big, long, flat, and even when you open them up, half the time they stay flat on the table. That's why the people like the gingham scissors so much. This is a very bad pair of scissors. As you can see, there's a big space right there as it sits on the table. So when I'm cutting, I'm always going to be picking my fabric up as I cut, and it's gonna produce uneven lines. And so we really want to do even lines. So everybody come over to the table. I'm going to show you the easiest way to cut. Okay. It's very important when you cut that you don't try to turn corners. Okay. I want to cut in from the edge of a fabric as I cut. I also want to try to keep my fabric as flat on the table as possible when I cut. If I pick fabric up and try to cut up here in the air, that's when things get off, okay? So I want to keep things on the table. But you see, I've got excess fabric down here, and it's going to weight my fabric. It's actually going to pull things. So the first thing I want to do is cut off this excess fabric. That's why I put this nice sleeve pattern right here. Now you can see, after I cut a little bit, I actually put my hand on the table behind my scissors to hold that fabric there. You can see I'm cutting all along, and then I can just let that fall down the floor because I don't need it anymore. Okay? Just to show you an example of what I mean by I don't want to turn a corner. Okay? If I were to cut this back piece out, I would cut to here, and then I'd have to turn up there and turn, and then, try to wrestle with it. I don't want to have to wrestle with it. I want to just be able to cut it off. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut to that corner right there. I'm just going to cut basically around my piece so that it is separate from the rest of the fabric. Okay? Then I can go in from this edge and just cut along that curve. Yes, a curve doesn't count as a corner. And then come straight in from the edge of the fabric. And you see I cut all the way past my next line so that when I come in, I can just come in straight in from the edge of the fabric. This will make cutting so much easier. And it also makes, you're cutting your pieces a lot better. Okay? Again, I try to keep the piece as flat on the table as possible. I don't want to have to lift up and cut. If I lift up and cut, I'm doing something wrong. Now, you see how big these pieces of scrap fabric are? They're garbage. Okay? I know we want to save fabric, and I know, fabric's expensive and everything else like that. This is about the only piece that would be usable for something, and really honestly, I could make a small bag out of that. Maybe a collar piece on another, but really honestly, it's not very usable, okay? If a piece is less than a 6-inch square, it's not very usable. So just get rid of it. saving fabric scraps, I did it for years. And I toted boxes of fabric scraps that were like this big from one apartment to the other, and it was useless. I never used them, and eventually, guess where they ended up? Yes, in the garbage. I spent more time and money moving that fabric than I ever used. And you know what? It was just, it was that it was a cost that you don't see, unrecognized cost. Yes, I understand fabric's expensive and you want to save as much of it as possible. Okay? But the fact of the matter remains is if you're spending a lot of time toting it from one place to another, it's taking up space in your apartment or house, it's not very useful. Okay? Like I said, this is about as small a piece as I would ever keep. And even this I'm looking at like, no. Especially since this is mock-up fabric, I'm just going to throw it away. Yeah, I'll keep that big piece because that big piece is useful. Alright? And I can get pattern pieces out of it. But the rest of this fabric that I'm going to cut away is going to end up in the garbage. Because unless you got a compost heap, it's really not useful. After I cut a piece out, I fold it up neatly, and I put it in a little pile. I'll put all my pieces in a pile, because if I'm doing several pieces at a time, several layers at a time, I want to know which pieces go with which layers. So each layer will have its own separate pile. I did 8 garments at once for Steph when we were getting stuff ready. You should have seen my table. I had a pile for this doublet, and a pile for that doublet, and a pile for this pair of pants, and a pile for that pair of pants. And they were all labeled with pieces of paper and everything else like that. And I was able to pick one pile up and work on that and then put it back in its pile and everything else like that. And I kept everything neat and organized. Keep your stuff neat and organized and you won't lose pieces. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and cut your stuff out. Try to keep your fabric as flat to the table as possible. Got it? All right, go for it. Okay. I came to this point, okay, and I could cut this all off, and I want to turn a corner, but what I've done is I've cut past my edge, okay, cut past the line, and now I can come in from a solid corner. You see how I did that? That way I'm not actually turning a corner, and then I can just cut the rest of that off, and then I'll be able to cut this. You see how I did that? On my epaulette, you can see I've drawn a line. That's about a ½ an inch up from my point. Okay, so I don't want to have to worry about the point of the epaulette. So if you've got way a lot coming off the end of that epaulette, when I did my pattern, I just did the point of the pattern was here. That's a ½ an inch up, and I just drew a line across. So sounds good. Okay, so go to keep cutting. Right here on my pattern pieces, I have my front piece and I have my skirting piece. And the corner of my front piece comes right into the edge of my skirting piece. It's better to cut that straight line first, okay? That way I don't have to worry about trying to get around that corner. So when I cut this, I'll cut this edge, and again, I'll go past that corner. So again, I can come straight in from the corner that way, make life a little easy on myself. Just try to do that curve as best I can. I'll just be very careful as I go by to not cut that corner off. And look, neither piece is interfered with. So, you just got to watch it when you're cutting. Try to do the simplest thing possible. Okay? Don't make life hard on yourself. Alright, now, the way I pin is just how I was taught to pin. Other people pin different ways. My way, not necessarily the right way. It's just the way I was taught. Okay? With this mock-up, we really don't need to worry too much about what's known as the right side of the fabric. The right side of the fabric is the side of the fabric that's going to show. Okay? When we get to our doublets, we will actually worry about that. For right now, we just need to pin the seam edges and go for it. Okay? Skirting piece, we're not going to need to worry about for right now, because that's going to come later. Same thing with the epaulette piece. So the only pieces we need to worry about now, front piece to back piece, possibly the collar if you didn't cut it on a fold, and the sleeve. Now I cut my collar on a fold, so I don't have to worry about it. That's pretty cool though, isn't it? You can see my back piece. I unfolded it. You can see what it looks like. It now looks like a legitimate back, doesn't it? Isn't that pretty cool how it goes? Now what I'm concerned with between the back piece and the front piece is pinning the side seams and the shoulders. Okay? Now, my back piece, the side seam is very straight. My front piece, it curves all over the place. You know? And so we're going to have to do something known as easing. Okay? I'm going to take one of my front pieces. Now, obviously, my shoulder's going to match up with my shoulder, so let's pin it in the right direction. If I pinned it like this, there would be something wrong, okay? So make sure things go in the right direction. What I want to do is we know that these side seams are the same length. How do we know? Because we made them that way. And we did our pattern, we measured, right? So we're going to match up our bottom corner. Now, I put my pins perpendicular to my seam, because I'm going to sew right over them when I sew. I don't worry about it. Other people like to put them parallel to their seam and remove the pins as they sew. I prefer just to sew right over them. Yeah, I break a few needles, but hey. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match up my front corner. My back side seam is on the bottom. My front side seam is on the top. That's because my front side seam has all the curves in it and makes life difficult. Okay? You can see these things don't match up. There's curves everywhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to ease that curve into that straight edge. How often you put pins is up to you. You want to put a pin probably, just where, it needs to be. If it's straight edge against straight edge, I'll put a pin about every 2-3 inches. Because I'm dealing with this curve, the pins are going in about every 1.5 inches. There's going to be some wrinkling. There's supposed to be some wrinkling. You may have to kind of stretch the fabric a little bit and everything else like that. Just kind of try to match the edge up. Now I grab it with my pinky where there's a pin, and then I can pinch it with my thumb and index finger and slide those edges together and put a pin in. Like I said, there is going to be some wrinkling and some bunching. Try to make the seam as smooth as possible. When we sew, that's all going to come out. You can see it doesn't even sit flat anymore. It's not supposed to. Okay, is your body flat? No, it has curves and edges to it. You can already see what putting this curved into that straight edge has done. It has created, waves, and that's what we want. We want shape to our doublet. We're going to have to do the same thing up here in this shoulder, because remember, we put a curve in the back edge of that shoulder. So again, I'm going to match up one side, and again, they're supposed to be relatively the same length, but remember, we made that back seam a little longer, okay, because we needed more material back there. Now you may notice that the point of my front, okay, it's going to hang over a little bit. Basically, I'm guesstimating where that 1/2 inch seam allowance hits. Okay, you guys can see that. You can see, you can look at it where I'm just like, okay, that's about a 1/2 inch. Boom. And that's what I let it hang over. Now, if I match these up, you can see they're not the same length. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it just a little bit. And kind of grab a little bit in each hand and stretch it. And then try to pinch it right in the middle. There, close to the middle. And put a pin there. And that will help me ease that seam together. Okay? And I may put a couple extra pins in there and that kind of thing. So what I'm doing is I'm spreading the excess of the seam out throughout the seam. If you spread it out enough, it becomes insignificant. And that's what you want to do. And you can see I've pinned one front, and now I need to pin the other front. And so I want to make sure that, the seams are on the same side. So again, try to make everything match up. And then I'll pin this together. I'll do that here in a second. For my sleeve, I didn't cut my sleeve on a fold, so I have an extra seam. Okay? All I need to do is pin the long edges. Because guess what? The short edges are open. One's for the top of your arm, one's for your wrist. So, those are going to remain open. So don't sew the short ends of the sleeve, because otherwise you're not going to be able to get your arm down it. If you cut your sleeve on a fold, you only need to pin the one edge. And what's really nice about this is I don't really have to match anything up, because I haven't taken my two pieces apart. Yeah, I can just do it. And then since this is such a straight edge, I'm only going to do a pin about every 4 to 5 inches. Because, straight edges are easier to sew, and they'll stay together a lot easier. And so it doesn't really matter too much. Oh, another little piece, don't ever put pins in your mouth. Okay, I've seen people do it, and then they suck in too fast and swallow a pin. Not going to pass that very easily. So, the important thing is that we made all of our seams the exact right length. If you're doing a seam, like 2 side seams, and you're going to end up with like an extra inch of fabric, nope, not supposed to be an extra inch of fabric. It's supposed to match up. Okay? You'll see that when we put the collars in. Okay? But we can't put collars in until we get the shoulder sewn. So either tonight before you leave, or after you leave, you can go home. You can pin your fabric, as best you can. We'll check it before we sew it. Okay. Next week we're going to start sewing. Okay. So you will need to bring your machines. If you've got an iron and an ironing board, bring that. Okay. Because we're going to end up pressing seams and all that kind of good stuff. So we're going to need irons and stuff like that. Yeah. Yes, ironing's a big part of late period. You're going to need to iron. And yes, they did iron. They would also use the heat of their hands to press seams open. So, so irons did exist back then. So, but that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think of anything else. We'll do that next week, because again, we cannot put this piece into that piece until we've sewn the side seam or the shoulders, because that makes the armhole. Okay, see, I pinned it, but I can't sew into this until I've sewn these two seams. Okay, now I like to use the pins without the heads on them. Okay. Again, they go through the machine a lot easier. You can use the pins that have the little plastic ends on them. Some people find those are easier to push through fabric. I don't like them because they make it difficult to sew. I know. No, I'm not looking at you. I'm just saying, that's just me. But these pins, I can buy 100 of them for like $1. And so when I bend them or break them, I don't worry about them. Okay, so I buy cheap pins because I know I'm going to sew through them, and I know I'm going to bend and break them all the time. They make like little lightning bolts. It's pretty cool. So go ahead and finish your cutting and your pinning, and we will all see you all next week.